The words that Davis first said when Anne was born were shocking. "Oh, what a shame. She looks like Betty. Pilgore." I couldn't believe those were the words he would say about our newborn child. Davis must have really been after the money from the beginning. As if it were someone else's problem, he said this to me as I struggled with child rearing. Babies are tough, aren't they? Just watching while sipping on a drink. From that day until now, Davis has shown no interest in childcare. "You're useless, not even taking care of the kids. Let's divorce. Pay me $50,000 in alimony." Davis laughed uproariously with Eileen. I was trembling with rage I had never felt before. What does he think children are? I will never hand Anne over to a man like this. He can keep turning away from reality, taking the easy way out, and being spoiled. The world doesn't always go the way you want it to. I hate to burst your heavenly bubble, but you're going straight to hell. My name is Betty White, a 43-year-old housewife. I live with my husband and our daughter, who was born 2 years ago. I met Davis, my husband, at a friend's wedding reception 3 years ago. I'm a novelist, though not very well known. Because of my profession, I lead a somewhat secluded life, and being shy, I was a bit overwhelmed by the casual atmosphere of the reception. I was headed toward the exit, trying to sneak out, when I was approached by a man named Davis, who later became my husband. "Hey, are you leaving?" My first impression of him was that he seemed sincere. Apparently, Davis was also feeling out of place at the reception and was bored. That's how we started communicating, and before I knew it, we were dating. Being with him, I realized that Davis was a bit naive or out of touch with the world. One day, Davis said, "My parents are telling me to become independent. I've been living abroad, so it can't be helped, right? I'm still not used to life here, so it's scary." Davis was younger than me, but he was already 35, a full-grown adult. Even though he had been abroad, I thought he was being too dependent. However, Davis's innocence and naivety were enough to stir my maternal instincts. Before I knew it, I had invited Davis into my home, and we had started living together. My house was built as a 2-family home, with the first floor as my workspace, and the second floor as our living space. It was around the time Davis had settled down into my house. "Hey, my dad said he'd give us $3,500 if we have a child, so let's get married." He proposed to me with the same casualness as if he were suggesting a trip to the spa. Having almost no experience in love, I wondered if that's how it was supposed to be, and I accepted his proposal. Soon after, I became pregnant. Being pregnant at 40, there were many things I had to be careful about. Since I had just finished a long-running serial novel, I decided to take a break from work for Davis and her child. 2 years have passed since our daughter Anne was born. Anne has started her terrible twos, and she cries and says no to everything. I thought this was part of her growth, and I tried everything to keep Anne happy. "Betty, Anne is too loud and I can't sleep. Please quiet her down," Davis said, appearing in the living room. It was just past 8 p.m. Davis was out drinking with his colleagues until morning and then went straight to work, or so he said. He claimed he was so tired he couldn't help but sleep. "I'm sorry, I think she'll calm down soon." I wanted to blame Davis for going out drinking without coming home, but calming Anne down was my top priority. If I could calm Anne down, Davis would be satisfied too. "It must be nice for you, Betty, staying at home all the time without working. All you have to do is housework and childcare. And here I am working myself to the bone every day." With that, Davis went back to the bedroom. I don't know where he picked up this line, but it has become his recent catchphrase. I was fed up with these cliched words that a father who doesn't participate in childcare would say. When Davis found out I was pregnant, he was overjoyed. "Yes, you did it, Betty. We just got $3,500. I wish I hadn't heard those words, but Davis quickly reported the pregnancy to his in-laws and received the money. He was as happy as if he had received a bonus, but common sense would tell you that this was a gift from his in-laws. Normally, this money would be used for things like baby clothes or milk, but Davis unhesitatingly pocketed it. Still, I prepared a thank you gift for my in-laws with my own money. Davis, for better or worse, is naive and lacks common sense. On top of that, he seemed to have a significant lack of empathy. When Anne was born, these were the very first words he said. Oh, what a shame. She looks like Betty. Pilgrim. I couldn't believe those were the words he would say about our newborn child. Davis must have really been after the $3,500 from the beginning. As if it's someone else's concern, he says this to me as I struggle with childbearing. Babies are tough, aren't they? And all he does is watch, sipping on his drink. From that day until now, Davis has shown no interest in childcare. One day, I had to meet someone for work. Although I was on a break, I wanted to prepare for my comeback by discussing future works with my publisher. I was calling my parents to ask them to look after Anne. Hearing that, Davis said, "What? Who are you going to meet? Leaving your child behind like that? Don't you think it's pitiful? You're a terrible mother, the worst." This is what they call a failure as a mother. It was harsh. Even I had to argue back at Davis's words. Then, could you watch Anne for me? I'm sure Anne would rather be with her dad than go to her grandparents' house. Davis's face twisted in obvious displeasure. Don't joke with me. Why should I spend time with the child? I'm busy. I don't have time to play with the kid. Busy, but probably just going to go gambling or something. I was disgusted by Davis's words and decided to leave Anne with my parents as originally planned. My parents' house is a bit far away, so my father came to pick her up by car. However, since my father always drinks during the day, I had to go pick her up myself. After finishing my meeting in the evening, I was hurriedly preparing to go pick up Anne. Then, unusually, Davis appeared in the living room. He probably lost and ran out of money earlier. I thought that, as the father, even if imperfect, I wanted him to do at least that much. Perfect timing. I'm gonna pick up Anne now. Could you get the car ready? But still, the words that came out of Davis' mouth were these. No, it's a hassle. I had anticipated this, so without being disappointed, I prepared to leave the house. Then, surprisingly, Davis spoke unexpected words. Okay, I'll get the car. I doubted my ears for a moment, but seeing Davis heading to the parking lot with the car keys, I could feel for the first time that he indeed had some awareness as a father. I was filled with a small joy, but it was shattered as soon as I got into the car and closed the door. Since I'm getting the car, give me $300. Davis said that and held out his hand. I see, so that was his goal. I thought my shoulders dropping. Once I was in the car, I couldn't refuse. Anne was waiting at my parents' house. I had no choice but to hand over the $300. Thank you. I'm sure I'll win on the next machine. Just leave it to me. Davis started the car, almost humming with excitement. In retrospect, asking Davis to get the car might have been a mistake. We spent the journey without much conversation. Then, a few miles from my parents' house, Davis's smartphone rang. He picked it up and started checking the message. Davis, be careful. You can check it after you stop the car. Even though I said that Davis was looking at his smartphone screen while driving. Hey, I do this all the time, so I'm used to it. It's fine. Davis said that, and even seemed to be replying to the message. At that moment, I felt the car tilt slightly to the right. Watch out. The next moment, I saw the concrete wall of the median barrier looming in front of us. Davis hastily turned the steering wheel. With a loud crash, the car stopped. The airbag deployed, and I remember feeling a crushing sensation. Hearing sirens in the distance, I lost consciousness. When I came to, I was in a hospital bed. I tried to move my body a little. Ouch! A numbing pain shot through my entire body. When the car hit, I honestly thought it was over. The moment we crashed into the median barrier, all I could think of was Anne. Speaking of which, I wonder how Anne is doing. I hope she's safely at my parents' house. I hope Davis hasn't done anything strange. Oh, what happened to Davis? As I was glancing around with wide eyes, a woman spoke to me. Are you looking for your husband? I turned to the voice and saw a woman in the hospital room. You're the one from today's meeting, I said. That's right, this woman was the new person in charge at the publisher I met with today. Her name was Julia Brown, if I remember correctly. Ma'am, your husband was only slightly injured, so he went home after receiving treatment and examination. It's terrible, isn't it? Leaving without even showing his face in the hospital room while his wife is in this condition. Julia looked even more frustrated than I did. Apparently, she wanted to thank me for today's meeting and called me. But it was after the accident, so someone from the hospital answered the phone and explained the situation. The hospital staff said they asked me if it was okay to tell Julia what happened. Even though I was barely conscious, I nodded vigorously. "You're too dedicated to your work," Julia said, laughing. "Your child is safe at your parents' house, so don't worry. And if you don't mind, may I help you during your hospital stay?" I knew I couldn't rely on Davis, so Julia's offer was very welcome. But I was torn about whether it was right to be taken care of by a stranger like Julia. "Please let me do it. I'm in charge of you, after all," Julia reassured me. Encouraged by her words, I decided to let her take care of me. With Julia's devoted assistance, I was able to be discharged. However, I had hit my back hard, and the pain made it impossible for me to walk, so I was forced to use a wheelchair for a while. In the end, Davis never came to the hospital while I was admitted. He only occasionally emailed to ask for money. Transfer 300, his email read. When I was discharged from the hospital, it was my father who drove me home. I was able to pick up Anne at the same time. My parents at home said they were willing to keep Anne for a while longer, given the circumstances, but I couldn't let them do that. I wanted to spend time with Anne too. "Davis is here, so it'll be fine," I reassured my father. But even after I said that, his face looked unsatisfied, as if he was feeling something was off. Something was off, but he didn't pry any further and said, "If anything happens, just let me know," and left. Fortunately, my house was designed with barrier-free access on the first floor, considering the possibility of living with my parents in the future. I had been using it as a workspace, but since getting married and taking a break, I had mostly been living on the second floor. I used to work overnight on the first floor, so I had bedding and other necessities there. The room on the first floor was spacious and had fewer items, and since it was barrier-free, I felt safe letting Anne play there to some extent. I shifted my body from the wheelchair and managed to sit on the sofa. This was possible thanks to Julia's active involvement in my rehabilitation. Anne noticed me sitting on the sofa and came running over. "Mama, does your leg hurt?" Anne asked. "I'll rub it for you," she said, stroking my leg. I couldn't help but feel love for Anne and hugged her tightly. How could Davis not cherish such a gentle and lovely child? I'm truly grateful from the bottom of my heart that Anne wasn't in Davis's car this time. I'm really glad that I was the only one seriously injured. I felt a dark emotion towards Davis welling up inside me. For my sake, and above all for Anne's sake, I had begun to think about my future life with Davis. The day after I was discharged, Davis came to the room on the first floor. There was a band-aid on his forehead, perhaps from the injury he sustained in the accident. "Wow, I didn't know this was part of my house. I thought it was just a 2-story apartment building," I said. "It's not unreasonable to think that, since the house has separate entrances for the first and second floors," I added. I had informed him by email that I would be discharged yesterday, but I guess he wasn't surprised that I didn't return to the second floor. He probably didn't care. He's a man who has no interest in anything around him. I looked at Davis, somewhat dumbfounded, and noticed an unfamiliar young woman behind him. She looked very young, around 20. "Oh, this is Eileen. She's young and cute, right? A big difference from you," Davis said. "Sorry to spring this on you, but I want you to leave this house." "I'm going to marry Eileen," he continued. I was stunned by the sudden request, but the moment I saw this young woman, I had imagined the possibility. And then Davis began to talk about something completely unreasonable. "You know, when I think about it, I got into the accident because I was driving for your errand, right? So I'm the victim who got caught up in it. You're the perpetrator. Your injury might be your own fault, but mine is totally collateral damage, so I'm going to demand compensation from you," he said. I was speechless. I wanted to peek inside Davis's head to see how he could come up with such an idea. Plus, Eileen's a nurse, a big difference from the unemployed you. She works, so she doesn't hesitate to spend money like you, he added. "She's the best woman." Davis said that and hugged Eileen. I felt no jealousy at all, just a creepy feeling. And then Davis said something outrageous. "Also, I'll take Anne. You get some kind of allowance if you have a child, right? Betty, you're sneaky, keeping such a good deal quiet. Kids can be surprisingly useful." You've been leaving Anne at your parents' house all the time, right? You're a terrible mother. Since you're in a wheelchair now, I'll definitely get custody. If I hadn't been in a wheelchair, I might have raised my hand to Davis. That's how absurd what he said was. I couldn't stop the trembling in my clenched fists on my lap. Anne seemed to sense something and clung to me. A useless person who doesn't even take care of the child. Divorce. Pay me $50,000 in compensation. Davis was laughing uproariously with Eileen. I was trembling with rage I had never felt before. What does he think of our child? I will never hand Anne over to this man. He can keep running away from reality, taking the easy way out and being a spoiled brat. The world doesn't work the way you want it to. I hate to burst your bubble while you're feeling like you're in heaven, but I'm gonna make sure you fall straight to hell. I will never forgive you. Ignoring the two idiots laughing loudly without reading the room, I went to my desk at work and brought out a piece of paper. Then I handed it to Davis. Here you go. Here are the divorce papers. Davis looked dumbfounded for a moment, but then laughed again. That was quick. Just like you. Make sure to send me $50,000. This man only talks about money. I sighed the deepest sigh of my life. Okay, $50,000 it is. We needed to clarify what the money is for in the paperwork. So this is for compensation because the accident was my fault, right? Davis, happy about receiving the money, nodded vigorously. That's right, I got into the accident because of your negligence. I spoke calmly, though I was amazed. All right. I'll send the formal document later, so make sure to sign it along with the divorce papers. And I'll take care of Anne. I won't give you custody. That's non-negotiable. I said, looking seriously into Davis's eyes. Pressed by my determination, Davis said this. Okay, I'll give up on Anne. Now that I think about it, she doesn't like me at all, and she's not cute. I didn't tell you, but Eileen is pregnant, so I don't need Anne. I'll get another $50,000 from my dad. Does he even think about how Anne feels being called not cute by her father? I didn't want Anne to hear any more of Davis's harsh words, so I urged her to go back to the room. Davis, are you really sure about this? I asked Davis for final confirmation. Of course I'm sure. Betty, make sure to leave this house and transfer the $50,000 as soon as possible. Davis and Eileen said that and went back to the second-floor room. I called Anne. Anne came running to me and clung tightly. Mama! Anne and I are always together. Anne looked anxious. I hugged her tightly to reassure her. It's okay. We'll always be together. I decided to stay with my parents for a while, along with Anne. I moved the work desk and all the other furniture on the first floor to another location. After a while, I received a signed compensation document and divorce papers from Davis at my parents' house. He's really a naive and straightforward man. His straightforwardness was part of the charm that attracted me to him. But now there's not a shred of love left. I can send him to hell without mercy. It was about a month after I left the house when I noticed my smartphone vibrating while taking a break from working on a new manuscript. I had been engrossed in the manuscript and hadn't noticed, but there were dozens of calls from Davis displayed in the call history. I thought it was about time for him to call. I didn't want to talk to Davis, but I reluctantly answered the phone. Hello, what's going on? I heard Davis's unusually panicked voice on the other end. Hey, what's going on? Some workers are here trying to take all the furniture and stuff. They're even saying they're going to demolish the house. I couldn't help but laugh and burst out laughing. Davis's panicked voice was so funny I couldn't help but laugh. Hey Betty, stop laughing and get over here now. You won't get away with this. Davis hung up the phone with a flourish. Even though there was no guarantee I would answer the phone again, and even though I hadn't promised to go over there, he hung up on his own. What a foolish man, incapable of thinking ahead. But I had to show Davis help properly after this, so I decided to go to him. Anne is currently attending daycare. As I was wondering how to get there, the doorbell rang. The visitor was Julia. Ma'am, are you going somewhere? I explained the situation and told her I was going to see Davis. Then Julia said, in that case, ma'am, I'll go with you. I'm sure I can be of help to you. She gave me a ride in her car, and we headed to Davis's place. On the way, Julia told me a surprising truth. I understood everything that had happened so far, and in a way I wanted to see Davis sooner. When we arrived at the house, the movers were in the middle of taking out the furniture. Davis spotted me and ran over in a flash. "Hey, what's going on? Is this your doing? Do something about it." Davis was full of energy until then, but he turned pale when he saw Julia getting out of the car. "Long time no see, Davis. It turns out Julia is Davis's real sister. I was surprised when I heard it in the car." Moreover, they were almost estranged. "Let's not stand around talking," I said. "Let's go inside." With that, we moved to a room on the first floor. Davis was pale and silent. Eileen, who was with him, looked puzzled. In the empty room, since the conversation wouldn't progress if we stayed silent, I spoke up. "Don't demolish this house. I don't need it anymore. The furniture is being moved to my new house. I'll live there with Anne and my parents." With that, Davis started talking angrily. "Why? Eileen and I are living here now, aren't we? Don't demolish it without asking." Eileen was nodding in agreement. "This is my house. I built it with my money." At my words, Davis looked unconvinced. "How can a person like you who is always changing build a house? Stop lying." Julia countered Davis's words. "Davis, you really don't know anything. Betty is being modest, but she's a popular author who has published many books. Some of her works have even been turned into dramas and movies. She's not someone a man like you should be able to marry." I thought calling me a bestseller was an exaggeration, but it's true that several of my works have been adapted into visual media. "But she didn't write while she was married to me, right? So she was unemployed, wasn't she?" Davis's argument was off as usual. Julia continued, exasperated. "Did you listen? Betty has written several works in the past. The more they sell, the more money she gets. That's called royalties." Davis didn't seem to understand. "Davis, income isn't just salary. I don't get a salary, but I do get $300,000 a year in royalties." Davis's eyes widened. He had found a younger, cuter nurse and no longer needed me, an unemployed person in a wheelchair. But the sound of an annual income of $300,000 made a big impression on Davis. "So that means I get half in the divorce settlement, right?" "Yes, I did it. An annual income of $150,000. I was at a loss for words at his simplicity. There's no other way to describe it but having flowers in his head. "Davis, Betty's royalties are from works published when she was single, so you won't get a penny, you know?" Davis's face froze in a "ha" expression. I hope he's grateful that he could even fantasize about having $150,000 for a moment. I added fuel to the fire. "The same goes for this house. I built it when I was single, so it's not subject to property division. The furniture, too. Davis just moved into the house where I was living. I'll leave only what you two bought. We're divorced, and I won't let a stranger live in my house, so please leave soon." Davis's face showed his disbelief once again. He came at me with great force, asking where they were. "They were supposed to live. I don't know. You have $50,000, so you should be able to find a place to live quickly, right?" At my words, Davis's face turned visibly dark. "The $50,000 gone. I went on an overseas trip right after that, and it was gone quickly when I played at the casino. Losing a fortune gambling is just like Davis, but there's not a shred of sympathy for such a thing." "But your new wife is a nurse, right? That's good. She has a steady income." I smiled sweetly. Then Davis, too, cracked a little smile and said, "Yeah, that's right. I'm saved because Eileen is working as a nurse. I quit my job and Eileen has been on paid leave for a month, you know?" The one who clouded her face at those words was Eileen. "That girl is not a nurse or anything. It was Julia who said that. Davis said he was getting married again, so at my father's request, I had Eileen investigated." "Eileen, you're unbelievable. Does Davis know everything?" Eileen shook her head slightly. "Eileen, you're a nurse, right? You said you were getting a monthly salary of $4,000, right? Is that wrong?" The naive and ignorant Davis seemed to have been deceived by this Eileen. I feel a little sorry for him, but this is what you call reaping what you sow. It seems like she was aiming to be a nurse, but didn't you lose your temper with a patient during training and injure them? The family kindly settled without making it a legal matter. But you ran away without paying a cent of the settlement money, didn't you? You're the worst. Eileen glared at Julia, and you've been going to strip clubs lately, haven't you? I heard your tab has exceeded 3 digits. You're running away without paying that, too. The one who went pale at this was Davis. Strip? Eileen, you don't have money? Didn't you borrow money from a moneylender the other day? You said you just didn't have cash. I became a guarantor thinking you were a nurse, but... Upon hearing Davis's words, Eileen defiantly said, "What are you talking about? You were the one who acted like you had money at first. I wouldn't have married you if I knew you didn't have money." It's a mudslinging match between the two. They're barking and cursing at each other. Excuse me, I hate to interrupt your argument. I poured cold water onto the quarreling couple. It seems there was infidelity during the marriage, so I'll be claiming damages from you two. Thank you. At my words, the two stopped arguing abruptly. By the way, please return the $50,000 I paid. The police checked the dash cam and it was confirmed that it was Davis's negligent driving. I gave you $50,000 because you said it was my fault. But it wasn't, so please give it back. Davis's face twisted more and more. A grown man on the verge of tears, a grown man. By the way, don't even think about running away. I, of course, plan to pursue you relentlessly. Julia has also contacted the patient's family, the strip club, and the moneylender you borrowed from, including your whereabouts. Everyone was relieved to find you. Good for you. Davis's face showed that this was not good at all. And finally, Eileen burst into tears. Eventually, all of the belongings were moved out of the house, and only Eileen's crying voice echoed. "This is Eileen's 7th marriage," Julia muttered as she checked the manuscript. I almost dropped the teacup I was holding. Every time the partner got pregnant, the $5,000 my father gave was ostensibly a celebration, but really, it was like an apology to the woman. Davis misunderstood it, thinking he would get $5,000 if a child was born. How could such a misunderstanding happen? I hung my head in dismay. Julia said she had given up on the irresponsible Davis and had cut ties with him. My father sent Davis abroad because he takes marriage and childbirth lightly. He was supervised overseas, so he didn't mess up, but I was surprised that he met Betty when he came back to the U.S. It's hard to believe, but Davis seems to have 6 children, including Anne. The family had been cleaning up after him every time he divorced, but they seemed to have completely run out of patience with the Eileen incident. Eileen wasn't even pregnant in the first place. It seemed to be a lie just to get the $5,000. I was astonished to see Eileen's social media posts about her time abroad, drinking, smoking, and even bungee jumping. Actually, my father, my husband, and I are big fans of Betty. So when we heard that Davis was getting married, we were really happy, but at the same time, we were very worried. I'm sorry I didn't immediately identify myself as your sister when you had the accident because of Davis. I didn't want to be hated. Instead of Davis, I wanted to serve you with all my heart. I hoped that by being with Betty, Davis would become a decent person. But in the end, I caused you trouble. I'm very sorry. I hugged Julia tightly as she bowed her head. Davis had such a wonderful family. I wish he had realized the blessing sooner. Mama walking good. After a long rehabilitation period, I was able to walk slowly on my own. Even now, Julia is still my editor and helps me with my daily life. Davis is now working day and night to repay his debts under the supervision of his father-in-law, along with Eileen. I am now living with my parents and Anne, writing novels in a new 2-family house. Mama, great. Amazing. Love you. Anne kissed my cheek. I hugged Anne tightly. I have a job that I love. And my dear Anne, this is heaven for me. I feel so happy now that I think I shouldn't wish for anything more. Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. If you resonated with the content, please leave a positive rating and a comment.